the Minister in the Presidency, Minister Nchabeni, Deputy Ministers present, Members of Parliament, Professor David Everett, Chairperson of the Statistics Council, the Statistician-General, Mr. Risenga Maluleke, colleagues from the media, ladies and gentlemen. Let me extend a very warm welcome to the Union Buildings as we are all gathered here to witness the launch and presentation of the Census 2022 report to the President of the Republic and indeed to the nation. The Census 2022 was the fourth population and housing count in post-apartheid South Africa, the first being conducted in 1996 and the subsequent censuses conducted in 2001 and 2011. The population and housing census was conducted in February of 2022, will provide comprehensive data on the population size, demographic trends, and other service delivery-related information. Before we start, I'd like to just point out that our program today is divided in two parts. The first part being the presentation of the Census 22 report as stated. The second part of the program will then be led by Status A, which will provide an opportunity for more in-depth engagement with members of the media present. The work of Status A is guided by the Statistics Act. The purpose of the Act is to advance the planning, production, analysis, documentation, storage, dissemination, and use of official and other statistics. Amongst other elements of the Act, it also provides for the establishment of the Statistics Council, which is chaired by Professor David Everett, who I'd like to now invite to the podium to take us through the contribution of the Council to this process. Let's please give him a warm welcome.
Thank you very much. I have to say it's slightly off-putting seeing this robot clenching its fists every 2 minutes. I hope it's not something I'm about to say. It laughs at jokes as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, Minister, SG, the Statistics Council is appointed in terms of Section 8.1 of the Statistics Act. The Council was appointed by the responsible Minister in the Presidency on the 1st of January 2019 for a term of 3 years. The term of this Council was later extended until the end of September 2023 to ensure that we could sign off on the public release of Census, which is what we're doing today. The duties and powers of Council are specified in Section 13 of the Act. It states that our job is to independently advise the relevant Minister in the Presidency and the Statistician-General or any organ of state that produces statistics. We also have to promote and safeguard official statistics, support the coordination of statistical activities, and ensure an environment which is supportive of the collection, production, dissemination, and use of official statistics. Censuses are a principal means of collecting essential information on the public. Its spatial distribution, age and sex structure, and other key social and economic characteristics. Census data are vital for social and economic planning, policy development, implementation, and evaluation. As said, we've had 4 population censuses since the advent of democracy. The population census of 2022 is the first digital census that was run in South Africa. In other words, you could answer through various modes, and there was no paper involved at any stage of the process. And we do recommend, we commend Stats South Africa for these innovations and recommend that they carry on into the future. But we have to note that COVID-19 profoundly affected the planning and execution of the census. It led to a year-long delay, this was meant to be Census 2021, in implementing the census, during which staff were only able to work remotely. It also required changes in the enumeration methods, caused some unique delays and challenges, such as in enumerator training, and influenced data collection efforts. COVID-19 also created challenges for enumerators, given the understandable health risk and anxieties in the population. In addition, Census 22 took place after the mid-year election campaigns, the unrest in KwaZulu and Gauteng, and the major flooding that occurred, all of which created an extremely challenging terrain in which to carry out the census. Despite these obstacles, the census team adapted to the situation and continued this work during the pandemic and subsequent events. So, the main findings. Council does not engage directly with the census data, nor does it have prior sight of census or any other data that is released by Stats SA. Council relies on the insights of a team of preeminent and independent local and international statistical experts who rigorously tested all aspects of the census in order for us to take a position on the census as a whole. The team of experts, who fairly obviously do access the data, assess the methodologies used, the training and fieldwork, the reliability of the post-enumeration survey, the robustness of the variables in the census. The main findings of the assessment managed by Council are as follows. Council holds the view that the results of the census will be useful for planning government service delivery, its core function. This view is informed by the full team of consultants managed by Council. The census and post-enumeration survey were conducted in line with international best practice. Council recommends the two following. Because we had to extend the enumeration period, it didn't all happen on census night. We had to keep it open. We've just said make sure that there is no, the possibility of forgetting who was in your house on that night may increase as you move away from the 2nd of February date. So just check that. We've said just model it to make sure it's not affecting the data and to manage the high levels of unspecified, what you and I would call no answer, which is an unavoidable outcome when you go digital and people are able to do this in their laptop at home. They can simply skip a question they don't want to answer, and in this case did. Council, informed by the experts, finds that fertility and migration indicators derived from the census are plausible, and I think that's particularly important. A cautionary note, and we have suggested cautionary notes be applied by the SG and by Stats SA. A cautionary note relates to data on the distribution of deaths of household members in Census 2022. Estimates of mortality should be based on data from childhood and parental survival, excuse me, which yields plausible estimates. Council recommends that Stats SA do not release the household death data until data confrontation with vital registration data is undertaken. In other words, we're saying do not release that data. Most of the service delivery indicators compare well with other censuses and surveys conducted by Stats SA. There are some concerns with certain variables, and Council suggests cautionary warnings be issued to with data on the following. One is the reliability of water supply and interruptions to water supply due to simply the high level of unspecified, in other words, no answer. The second one is questions relating to the ownership of assets, particularly refrigerators, electric or gas stoves, and vacuum cleaners. These may seem small, but they are part of how you construct your lifestyle, your LSMs. And so they are important variables. And again, there are high levels of unspecified. People just didn't answer it, and so we just don't know what the answer is. However, the main recommendation is that in view of the findings of the independent assessment managed by Council, we recommend to the Minister and the Statistician-General that Census 2022 is fit for purpose, and Council recommends that the phased release of the results be undertaken, in other words, the mortality data being the phased part, be undertaken in terms of Section 13 of the Statistics Act. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Everett, for that overview. The Statistics Act also provides for a Statistician-General as head of Statistics South Africa, who is responsible for the collection, production, and dissemination of official and other statistics. This includes the conducting of a census of the population, as well as the coordination among producers of statistics. And the gentleman who shoulders this responsibility is Mr. Risenga Maluleke, who I would like to now invite to the podium. Mr. SG.
Thank you, Mr. Program Director. When I got a clap of hands before I came to the podium, I was saying that it's only the statement we had from the Chair of Council. So we still have to get the numbers. Let's wait. We'll clap hands after the numbers. Let me take note. Let me take note of the President of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Matamela Ramaphosa, and indeed the Minister in the Presidency, Ms. Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, who the statistics function reports to, and the two Deputy Ministers in the Presidency, Deputy Minister Morolong and Deputy Minister Mutaung, and Deputy Minister Morolong, who has a delegated function of dealing with matters statistics with our arrangements with the Minister. And let me mention that with that responsibility, let me take note again of the Chair of the Statistics Council, members of Parliament here, and indeed members of the Public Service, the DG in the Presidency, Ms. Baleni is here, and I haven't recognized others, and let's just say staff members. I have a responsibility of making sure that we talk about the numbers. But I would like to introduce to all of us Melo Kuhle. As a statistical organization, and Melo Kuhle is standing in front of us here. As a statistical agency, we had to take into account the use of statistics in naming Melo. Melo Kuhle is the most popular name, female baby, that was coming out of our 2021. So every year in recorded live births, what we do is we look at the most popular names all over the country, by province, the most popular surnames, and we make them available. And of course, it's quite interesting when you use surnames, Mr. President. There's a lot of interest in saying in some provinces, oh, we know that we are responsible for increasing the population in this province. So there are a lot of interesting things. And as statisticians, we deal with everything about life, about entities. So at this point in time, let me indicate to the media that we are lifting the embargo. I know the media really wants to start showing I know our engagement all the time is that when we meet, we first brief you and then we say embargo lifted. It's because we want to be interactive. So here is Melo in front of us.
Greetings, Statistician-General of South Africa.
Melo, please have manners. Kindly greet everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Melo, will you kindly load the Census 2022 launch presentation?
I will do that gladly, SG, but I think you're forgetting something. Shouldn't we first tell the story of how the count was done?
Oh, Melo, thank you very much for reminding me. Let us talk about how the count was done. Will you please load the video of how the count was done?
As the sun rises from the mountains of Mpumalanga, South Africa rises with strength and hope for a better future and improved socio-economic climate. This is why a census is critical in playing a role in advancing the aspirations of the majority of South Africans. In 2022, South Africa conducted its fourth population census since 1996. A painstaking undertaking, the census provides a true reflection of the country's socio-economic dynamics, its growth and its development trajectory over time.
Since 1994, we have had 4 population and housing censuses in South Africa. One in 1996, then in 2001, followed by the 2011 one. And indeed, this census that we conducted in February 2022. The scale of a census is incomparable to any other project in the country, and consequently, detailed and accurate planning and testing is essential to effectively execute such a project. we set out to count everyone within the borders of South Africa without omission or duplication.
The people of Newcastle and all other villages, townships, and towns in KwaZulu-Natal were counted. Communities across the province of Mpumalanga were counted. The Basotho people of Putadichaba and the entire province of the Free State were counted. Nwanzeku and the entire province of Limpopo were counted during the census. Mthatha in the Eastern Cape, including Komani, and the entire province participated in the census and were successfully counted. The people of Pampierstad and the rest of the Northern Cape were counted. Western Cape and its citizens were counted. Sandton and the rest of Gauteng were counted. And the people of Dinokana and the rest of the Northwest Province were counted.
This turned out to be one of the toughest challenges due to the complexities in the environment, including COVID-19 and how load shedding impacted on some of our processes. Indeed, I can't overstate the importance of a census for the country. Census 2022 data provides insights on living conditions of South Africans in terms of the number of households, average household sizes, and the type of dwelling structures they live in, as well as access to water, availability of essential services and facilities, as well as access to internet. This information is critical in understanding and addressing development challenges at all levels of geography and community.
As the world enters the fourth industrial revolution, Census 2022 became South Africa's first successful digital population count. A multi-mode data collection approach was adopted and used in the collection of information from respondents. These were face-to-face interviews, telephonic interviews, as well as computer-assisted web interviews. Close to 100,000 field workers were brought on board to administer the census questionnaire. A multi-mode data collection method became an advantage in conducting the census in the COVID-19 pandemic space as strict regulations had been introduced. Censuses provide reliable data at various levels of planning. Information collected during the census process plays a critical role in planning at the national, provincial, and municipal levels by providing policymakers with the information required to formulate rational policies and implement service delivery.
For the next 10 years, this information is going to be important for all our data users. Here I'm talking about our stakeholders in the three spheres of government in the form of policymakers and indeed development partners, civil society organizations, the private sector, researchers, and the general public. In closing, I would like to thank each and everyone who made Census 2022 a success. Our field staff, Census Project Management Team, the post-enumeration team, as well as members of civil society who opened their doors to be counted. I must emphasize that our biggest thumbs goes to members of civil society because without them we would not have been successful. I thank you. Ngiyabonga, enkosi, danki, ndihela kwami.
Now, Mr. President, that we have heard the story about how the count was done, we now want to hear the story about the numbers. Melo, please load the Census 2022 presentation. Indeed, if we go to the next slide, Melo, we are saying that in 1996 we used pen and paper. 2001 we used pen and paper and went straight into scanning technology. So was 2011, my apologies. In 2022, we had 3 modes: face-to-face, telephonic, and web-assisted. And all of these were digital applications. Melo, let's go to the next slide. And indeed, as we look at this, we are saying that COVID-19 propelled us to go into multimodal approach. And as we did this, we were affected in both census planning and implementation. One of the biggest challenges is that the 10th of October, and by coincidence, Mr. President, we were given this day, used to be a census night. And that's when we would go into field, 1996, 2001, and 2011. But as of now, 2022, we had to go into field in February. And that would mean that there are so many challenges. October was chosen largely because we know the students are in their home, the provinces where they are schooling in. But in February, some hadn't returned. And of course, even when we extended the period, the reference night still would not include some of them. So these are some of the data issues we will have to live with. We have had some provinces coming and say, Mr. SG, we have a number of students. Take this data and include it. We cannot. It has to be contained. It cannot be influenced by any other approach. It has to be done by State SA. So let us look at quality measures in the next slide, Melo. As we look at quality measures, we are saying that we had to build in validation rules to make sure that we monitor our enumeration throughout, minimal editing and imputations, and make sure that we had an independent team of experts. Council had their team. We also had our team that assessed and indeed evaluated the processes of data processing. And in the process, validation through census processes that occurred in the past. Next slide, Melo. What happened? We can tell the nation our collection rates. So in every province, in the Free State, our collection rates, that is the number of dwelling units we were able to reach, set at 98%, all the way to the Western Cape at 86%. Having said this, we could arrive in a dwelling and find that it's vacant. We could arrive in a dwelling and find that there is nobody, especially in situations where you find you have single households and the neighbors are not supposed to respond on their behalf. So these are some of the things we had to deal with. And now let us look at the post-enumeration survey. Next slide, Melo. In the post-enumeration survey, this is an independent survey that deals with the quality in terms of evaluation of the census, to deal with coverage error, content error, and indeed to give us an informed basis, a statistically informed basis for adjusting the census count. Next slide, Melo. Now, when we come to this slide, we talk about the undercount. I want to say that when we talk about the undercount, everyone starts to worry. We are talking about having reached 98% in the Free State, and now we are saying that the person's undercount is sitting at 20% in the 20.95%. But let us look at the Western Cape, 35.58% at person's level, 36.3% at household level. Eastern Cape, 32.4% and 27.24% at household level, all the way to Limpopo. They are not ranked in terms of the standing. It's the way we have listed them. And the undercount for South Africa is 31.06%. And we use the persons as the headline undercount. But I don't want us to spend time on the undercount, because when we talk about the undercount, everyone says, these are the people that have been missed. We use this using the post-enumeration survey to adjust the population census accordingly. So the adjustments for provinces won't be the same. That is why you look at the provinces with the higher undercounts. It means they will have higher adjustments when we are dealing with adjustments out of what we got and what we are adjusting. And this is done in line with the United Nations methods. And that makes sure that we have the quality of our data guaranteed, and the veracity of our data to stand the test of time, so that in future, even 400 years from now, those who will use our data will know that one day we gathered in this room and our data can still stand the test of time. Now, let us look at the next slide, Melo. We looked mainly inequality in population group, sex, age group, marital status, relationship to the head of the household, country of birth. And of course, we looked at an aggregated index of consistency, and we are pleased to indicate that no characteristics showed a higher aggregated index of consistency. That is, they were low or moderate. Next slide, Melo. Now, having spoken about the next slide, we want to talk about the population of South Africa. We know now how much was done in terms of the counting, in terms of the people that we have missed, that we could not find even when we arrived at their households. Now, Melo, can you tell us what the total population of South Africa is as of the 2nd of February 2022?
No, I cannot. I am not the Statistician-General. Only the Statistician-General can release the numbers.
I'm sorry, Melo. I actually forgot that you are just standing next to the Statistician-General. Now, let's go to the next slide and say the population of South Africa as of the 2nd of February 2022 was 62.027 million. And of course, we can show how our population grew over time. Next slide, Melo. We can say that in 1996, there were 40.6 million, and we grew by 10.4% into 2001, where we were sitting at 44.8 million. In 2001 to 2011, we grew by by 15.5%, straight into 51.8 million. And the increase between 2011 and 2022, the increase was 19.8%, which represented 10.3 million persons, and it took us to 62.027 million. Now, we want to look at the provinces, Melo. Let's go into the next slide. Let us look at the provinces. KwaZulu-Natal, as of 1996, was the most populous province. It was followed by Gauteng. 2001, KwaZulu-Natal state. In 2011, it was overtaken by Gauteng. As we can see that Gauteng went all the way to 2022, sitting at 15.1 million, followed by KwaZulu-Natal at 12.4 million. But of interest is the Western Cape, which was number 5 in 1996. 2001, the same. It came after KwaZulu-Natal, Gauteng, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo. In 2011, it overtook Limpopo. And of course, now it has overtaken the Eastern Cape. It's sitting at 7.4 million, followed by the Eastern Cape, sitting at 7.2 million, 6.4 million. Let me indicate 7.4 million is the Western Cape, Eastern Cape 7.2 million, Limpopo 6.4 million, Mpumalanga 5.1 million, the Northwest 3.8 million, 3 million goes to the Free State, and the Northern Cape, as usual, it has the largest land mass. It's sitting at 1.4 million. Let us go to the next slide, Melo. We want to talk about demographics. And let us go again to the next slide, Melo. Indeed, let us look at black Africans. They are sitting at 50.5 million. That is, they account for 81.4% of the population. Colored population group, 5.1 million, accounting for 8.1%. And indeed, let us look at the white population group, 4.5 million, accounting for 7.3%, and the Indian Asians, 1.7 million, accounting for 2.7%, and other, those who didn't specify, at 200,000. But of interest is the white population group. When we look at 2011, they were sitting at 9%. They have now declined to 7.3%. Now, let us go into the next slide, Melo. The next slide gives us age cohorts. Children 0 to 14 years sitting at 16.4 million, accounting for 26.4%. Young people 15 to 34 years accounting for 21.6 million, sitting at 34.8%. Adults 35 to 59 years, accounting for 8 million, sitting at 29%. The elderly, the 60 years plus, sitting at 6.1 million, accounting for 9.8%. Melo, we want to talk about how many official languages that you speak.
As a recent immigrant to South Africa, I only speak English. I am hopeful one day I will speak all 12 official South African languages.
Melo, will you then take us to the next slide so that we can talk about the languages? I want us to look at the map first. When we look at the map, we might think that Afrikaans is the most spoken language because we see the color for Afrikaans in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. But we know that the Northern Cape is sparsely populated. It doesn't have much people. So now we want to start with the most spoken language. That is isiZulu, 24.4%. And we can see it's predominantly in KwaZulu-Natal, a bit in Mpumalanga, and of course some parts of the Free State. We can see it, we can look at the blue color. isiXhosa, largely in the Eastern Cape, a bit in KwaZulu-Natal, a bit in the Northern Cape. Followed by Afrikaans, sitting at 10.6%, as we can see, the Northern Cape and the Western Cape. Let us look at Sepedi, mainly in Limpopo, sitting at 10%. Let us look at English, sitting at 8.7%. And of course, let us look at Setswana, mainly in the Northwest, sitting at 8.3%. Sesotho, mainly in the Free State, 7.8%. Xitsonga, mainly in Limpopo, 4.7%. Siswati, 2.8%, mainly in Mpumalanga. Chivenda, sitting at 2.5%, mainly in Limpopo. Isindebele, 1.7%, mainly in Mpumalanga. The sign language is 0.02%, and other, we can see 2.1%. These are those that speak other languages other than the main languages we speak in South Africa. But we can see the gray colors in the provinces. It's where 2 or more languages were staking their claim and there was no outright dominance. And we can see in other parts of our country where they are showing. Now, let us proceed. We talk about migration, Melo. In the next slide, I will ask Melo to take us again to the next slide. In the next slide, we are saying that Gauteng received a net amount of 400,000 between 2011 and 2022. And we can see it was followed by the Western Cape, followed by Mpumalanga, followed by the Northern Cape. The other provinces in the form of the Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Limpopo had a positive negative net migration. It means that they actually over time are showing reversals. Their population is growing, but in terms of the movements, they are showing that they haven't gained as much as we can see in Gauteng. Now, we want to see largely in the 2 provinces where people are moving to. Next slide, Melo. We can see that in Gauteng, the population growth is driven by people who come from outside South Africa. Actually, about 50% of people who come from outside South Africa choose Gauteng as their destination. Internally, the population of Gauteng, the biggest contribution from provinces comes from Limpopo, followed by KwaZulu-Natal, followed by the Northwest and the Eastern Cape. Whereas when we look at the Western Cape on the right-hand side, we can see that the Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and people from outside South Africa are making an almost equal contribution to the Western Cape. Now, Melo, let us go into the next slide. Let us look at the top 5 sending countries. And we can say that they were the same between the 2 periods as in 2011 and 2022. Whereas in 2011, those who came from Zimbabwe were sitting at 38.1%, are now sitting at 45.5%. And of course, coming from Mozambique, 22%, 2011, now sitting at 18.7%. And Lesotho, 9.1%. in 2011 sitting at 10.2%, Malawi 4.9% 2011, and indeed 8.9% now. And the United Kingdom was sitting at 4.1% in 2011, now sitting at 2.8%. I must say, Mr. President, the staff members of State SA were saying that if we could release the numbers, we could not release the numbers. When the president was in Musina with the president of Zimbabwe, you would have liked to take these numbers along, but not even the president has presight to these numbers. He's limited. They are kept by the Statistician-General. Let us look at education in the next slide, Melo. And again, move us to the next slide. We are saying, when we look at 0 to 4, we are saying that 6 out of 10 children aged 0 to 4 years had access to some form of early childhood development program. The gray color on the left says that nothing. They don't have any opportunity. But from the green colors all the way, it's either at a crèche, a preschool, a daycare center, sitting with a gogo, or a day mother or a gogo, or a home, a community playground. We are saying that 6 out of 10, about 60%. But the challenges were more in the Northern Cape and the Northwest, where we can see that those who had no opportunity for early childhood development are sitting at more than 50%, right at the bottom. Let us look further in terms of education in the next slide. We are saying that the percentage of persons aged 20 years and older who completed a secondary education more than doubled from 16.3% in 1996 to 37.6% in 2022. Let us look at the bar on the second bar from the right-hand side. We can see that it's shooting up. And it's largely, when we look at the others, no schooling, it's declining. Completed primary schooling, it's declining. Some secondary declining. So it means we are seeing more people who have completed secondary school in the form of grade 12. And again, they are moving to post-school. And as they move on the extreme right, we can see that post-school has moved from 7.1% in 1996 to 12.2% in 2022. Let us look at the next slide. In terms of prevalence of disability, we have seen declines from 7.4% in 2011 to 6% in 2022. We want to now look at housing and households. Let us look at the next slide. And we want to go further into the next slide again. Let us look in 1996, we had 9.1 million households in South Africa. 2001, we were sitting at 11.2 million, having increased by 23.7%. 2011, we went up to 14.4 million, having increased by 28.9%. And indeed, 2022, we have gone to 17.8 million, having grown by 23.4%. And we can see that from 1996, we have doubled in the number of households that we have in South Africa. Now, let us look at housing in the next slide. Households that resided in formal dwellings increased sharply from 2011, having been sitting at about 77.6%. But when we look at 1996, they were sitting at 65.1%. We can see all the way to 88.5%. And as formal housing increases, we are seeing a decline in traditional housing and informal housing. Of course, Mr. President, when we bring these numbers, we bring them without taste buds. Our job is to bring numbers. I can see some nodding in the room, and I can see this nodding doesn't work with statisticians. We only bring the numbers because we bring both the good and the bad news. The statistics about the good, the ugly, and the bad, and we tell all of them. Now, let us look at service delivery in the next slide. And Melo, will you please take us to the next slide and look at electricity? In the form of access to electricity for lighting in South Africa, not lightning, lighting. And here, Mr. President, Minister, and members of the public, I don't want us to be caught up into the disruptions of load shedding. It's what members of the public have told us about the main source of energy for lighting. Whether it's there or it's disrupted or not, this is what they told us. So let us look at 1996. It was just some pockets that were yellow in the Western Cape. There's a place called Mkanyakude in KwaZulu-Natal. When you are at night, there's this tree that actually glows amber or yellow from far. So Mkanyakude was only in the Western Cape. In 2001, the Western Cape was universal. And in 2011, we could see the whole country was making it. As of 2022, almost the whole country is sitting between 80 and 100%. And indeed, only one municipality, eMadlangeni, fell below 80%. So, Mr. President, it's not my space to say it, but if we could solve the load shedding challenge, the people are already ready to switch on their lights at any given moment because the infrastructure is there. That's what they told us. We don't make up these stories at SABC. Members of the public tell us, Mr. President. And because they tell us all these stories, they also tell us the stories about water. Next slide. Now, let us look at water. In relation to water, we can see coming out of 1996, there were challenges in the Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal and some parts of the Northwest and parts of Limpopo. We made some improvements in 2001 all the way to 2011, but we have actually gone back largely in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape. This doesn't talk to disruptions. The disruptions that are there where they don't have electricity, water are there, but here is about access to piped water, either inside the dwelling or in their yard. So they are saying that if we get water to these taps, they will actually have water. In the next slide, we are talking about in 2022, over 4/5, that is 82.4% of households in the country had access to piped water either inside their dwelling or inside their yard. As we can see that we are saying 59.7 inside the dwelling and all the way where we had no access, we are just sitting at 8.7. Next slide, Melo. Over the period 1996 to 2022, the percentage of households with no access to piped water halved from 19.7% to 8.7%. And indeed, when we look at South Africa in the middle, on the left-hand side, we can see that. Now, let us look at the next slide. Households that resided in the Western Cape and Gauteng had greater access of flush toilets, sitting at 93.9% and 89.7% respectively. And we can see that there were issues in Limpopo where Limpopo had 3 times the amount of pit latrines without ventilation than the average, the national average. Let us look at agriculture in the next slide. Before we talk about what the purpose was, we can see that households in Limpopo and the Eastern Cape were active or participated in agricultural activities, sitting at 28.7% and 26.2% respectively, all the way to the Western Cape at 2.4%. But when we look at the purpose, let us look at the Western Cape at the bottom. We can see that the Western Cape, 21.9% produced only for sale, and those that produced mainly for sale and some consumptions were sitting at 13.6% in the Western Cape, and of course those who produced mainly for consumption and some sale were sitting at 7.1%. Now, let me thank you, Melo. And as I thank you, we have now seen how we have moved, and we really appreciate the value that you have actually assisted us. Please, Melo, may you assist me in launching the Census web portal.
It is my honor to launch the Census 2022 web portal on your behalf, SG.
Melo, will you please take us to the next slide, because the program director here wants me to conclude. This slide, which says Ndihela Kwala, and members of the media, you have to hear this story. This story that says Ndihela Kwala goes in one of our languages in Xitsonga. When I was growing up in the village as a little boy, we could read and write. Our mothers could not read and write. Our fathers were migrant workers in urban centers all over the country. So we had to be the scribes of our mothers when the letters came from Johannesburg or anywhere else. Our mothers and fathers had to find a standard way of concluding a letter. They could not end a letter with, "I love you, my husband," because those words, as their children, we were not supposed to hear them. If we heard them, according to village legend, we were going to go deaf. And we were not supposed to write them down, because if we wrote them down on behalf of our mothers, according to village legend, we were going to get blind. Because there's no way children would hear their mother telling their father, "I love you" or "I miss you." So mothers and fathers had to find a way amongst the Batsonga of ending the letter to say, "Ndihela Kwala." Many of us will remember the Bavenda would say, "Ndifelela hanef." The Batswana would say, "Kifetsa hona fa." The Bapedi would say, "Kifetsa hona mo." And of course, the East Xhosa speaking people would say, "Ngiceda khona apha ngomkhulu umbuliso." And the Basotho would say, "Kaditumediso na watsina." And those who speak isiZulu would say that ngiceda khona lapha. But mainly they would not write it that way. They would say, "Amaningyang now." So even myself, Amaningyang now. But let me mention that never, Mr. President, and never again, President Mandela once said, should we let any section of our society, be it men, women, children, or any other person based on their skin color, be excluded such that they cannot even express themselves on issues that matter the most to them. Matter the most to them, like love, where they can't even say to someone, "I love you" or "I miss you," because they have to express that through a proxy. Because we have numbers that tell a story and we cannot use them sufficiently enough. Let me assure you, Mr. President, Minister, Deputy Ministers, Chair of Councils, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, that my next slide is blank. If Melo could take me to the next slide, I would assure that is blank.
Thank you very much, SG. I just stood up to look at the numbers. It was not to intimidate you in any fashion. Mr. President, you're still going to pour over these numbers and process them, but I think we have some reason to give another round of applause because there's some encouraging signs coming out of these numbers. Thank you so much. DG, I think we may have solved our capacity issues in the presidency. The SG has agreed to second Melo Butle to us, and Melo Butle will start in my office and deputize me when I go on holiday. She's ready. I would like to now invite Minister Kumbuzo Chabeni, who, in terms of the Statistics Act, provides oversight function to State SA, but also provides support to the States Agency. Minister, you are tasked to deliver your remarks, but also invite the President and the SG to hand over the report.
Thank you. I think it's difficult not to smile. Mr. President, despite the conditions under which the Census 2022 were undertaken, coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic, actually barely out, we took the first gap, and I was in there, I was acting, Mr. President. We took the first gap of saying when the restrictions were lifted, we sent out the enumerators. But soon, when that was supposed to happen, the floods also ravaged the country. And I don't want to talk about the July 2021. And you saw that SA also benefited from the workforce of the oxes when the buckets had to be pulled. And enumerators risked their lives crossing flooding rivers to make sure that all South Africans have been counted. And you've heard the chairperson of the Statistician Council talking about the rigor in which those numbers were checked through. And that's why, as a country and a government, we have always maintained that Statistics SA is the only source of data and statistics in this country. And any other data that is sourced, or statistics that is sourced anyway, it's only those who comply to the requirements of Statistics South Africa. And we'll soon announce those ones that have been approved by Statistics South Africa to be the sources of reliable data, so that we do not create our own fallacies and self-fulfilling promises. But as I rise, Mr. President, to talk about the numbers and to invite you to talk about the numbers, I cannot bear not to gloat that as a minister who was responsible for launching the Artificial Intelligence Institute of South Africa with the University of Johannesburg and the University of Technology. This year they are expanding to 4 more hubs. I'm very proud that Maluleke is here helping the Statistician-General to deliver the statistics. It tells you, Mr. President, that the future of South Africa under the governing party is very bright and too bright. There's small challenges we are going to resolve, but we have confidence that the work that we are going to do with the statistics that we've been given, it gives us as government a real barometer of the challenges that lay ahead as we have to deliver services and those gaps that we need to close. And our people are admitting that which we have delivered for them as they mandated us. I'm very proud to invite you, Mr. President, as we start the journey towards 30 years of freedom and democracy, for you to respond to the numbers, and thereafter the Statistician-General will hand over the report to you. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. President.
Hello, Melo. Can you deliver this speech that I'm about to deliver? Okay, Melo is a little bit tired now. Minister Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, Minister in the Presidency. Deputy Minister Murolong and Deputy Minister Motaung. I haven't seen other colleagues from Cabinet. If they are here, I extend my greetings to you as well. DG Baleni, DG of our government, the Presidency, members of Parliament who are here present, Statistician-General Mr. Risenga Maluleke, and the Chairperson of Council of South Africa, Professor David Everhart, and members of the Statistics Council, and also the staff of Stats SA, and all distinguished guests who are here present. It is indeed a great honor for me to receive the results of Census 2022 as they've been presented by Maluleke and the Statistician-General. The Statistician-General relied a great deal on Maluleke, proving that artificial intelligence is one of the important tools that we should all utilize to get on with our lives and our work. This, as we heard, is the 4th census undertaken since the advent of democracy in our country, and as such, it contributes to a vast body of information and knowledge that describes the state and the progress of our state and the conditions under which our people live, as well demonstrated by the Statistician-General. We applaud the magnitude of effort that went into compiling Census 2022. We've been told that the enumerators from Stats SA first began their tests in 2018. In the midst of their work, in 2020, COVID-19 pandemic struck, but in the course of all that period, we also had local government elections which were very disruptive as well. We also had the unrest in our country, particularly in two provinces that are the most populous provinces in our country, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And then we had the floods that affected KwaZulu-Natal, as well as the Eastern Cape mostly, and Northwest. Now, confronted by the pandemic restrictions, particularly on the movement of people, Stats SA was innovative and adapted quite quickly, and I applaud them for that. Having decided in 2018 to develop multiple data collection methods, including computer-assisted telephonic interviews and online self-enumeration options, Stats SA introduced complete digitization of the entire census process. And this, I should say, follows in the wake of what our people have now become accustomed to. Our people are digitally oriented. They are digitally savvy. When you look at the way in which we utilize mobile telephony, and also in the way that we found later our people were able to receive, say, grants, particularly the social distress grant that we introduced during COVID. They received that through digital means. So the digital platform is what our people have become accustomed to. And in their millions and millions. And I'm really pleased and proud to see that Stats SA has utilized the method, the platform that our people have been so well accustomed to. As a result, Stats SA was able to undertake our census just 4 months after the initial date of October 2021. Adapting to the fluid situation on the ground meant that data collection processes had to be rapidly modernized. As a result, this is South Africa's first ever digital census, compiled from data collected from everyone within the borders of the country. And as the SG spoke, it was almost unimaginable that we could have had such a broad sweep of data collection where South Africans were counted. And when you begin to imagine it, you begin to see the enormity of the task. SG, I thought that the vaccination process, which I often spoke about from this platform here as we had our family meetings, was their biggest undertaking that South Africa had ever gone through. But today, I now know I was wrong. The census is the largest, all-encompassing process that our country in recent years has had to go through. And I can say that with the results that you've presented, you've gone through it with great distinction. And Stats SA is truly to be applauded for having undertaken such a mammoth task and did it so excellently. There will be doubters. There will be those who will want to doubt your information and the methods through which you went. And they will also always raise questions, and I'm glad that they will ask you questions once I'm gone. But I'm sure you will be able. And only you, as the Statistician-General of our country, Stats SA is the repository. It's the owner of statistics information in the country. No other. And you do this authorized by law, but now also authorized by convention, by protocol, by the way in which we are continuing to do things. And remembering that we are a young democracy. We're only 30 years old next year. And you have already scaled great heights in as far as dealing with information that is so important to the lives of our people. And census, as I said, is one of the most complex exercises a nation can ever undertake, and you've done it well, because it involves years of planning and preparation. And we went through it all as you were planning and asking for more money. Professor Everhard, your chairperson here of the council, kept saying, we need more money, we need more money. Now we understand why you needed all that money. And I'm sure that as I leave, the professor and yourself will say, are you going to give us more money? And the answer is yes, we should give you more money, because the work that you do is important. Now, it is a task that is also tough for your enumerators, who have had to traverse the country counting people in households, in hospitals, in prisons even, and in other institutions of learning, and also counting homeless people and finding them where they live, and in transit areas as well as the borders. That's a mammoth task. And as Minister Nchabeni was saying, I mean, the picture that you showed where a stuck vehicle of Stats SA had to be pulled by cattle, by oxen, it shows a great picture of the determination of your enumerators at work. A census also involves collating, aggregating, and publishing complex demographic, health, and economic and sociological data sets. Stats SA must be commended for placing an absolute premium on the credibility and the integrity of the data, and adhering to the highest international best practice methods, and also benchmarking what you do and using the guidance of the United Nations. So that in itself must infuse a lot of confidence as well as credibility in all of us in the information that Stats SA has put out. It is important that South Africans should have the utmost confidence in the numbers that have been presented today, and they should also welcome the statement by the Statistics Council on the results, because we have a Statistics Council which is also separate from the Statistics SA, and Stats SA is independent of government, and government, including myself, never know whatever the figures that they publish are. And we don't interfere. I don't even want to know before everybody else knows. And that speaks to the credibility and integrity of the information. Professor Everhard was telling me earlier that he also does not know what the figures are, and he's seeing the figures just as I also saw them for the very first time. So that speaks to the credibility of Stats SA. And of course, we all have wished to see the figures in advance. I always, wish that I get to see some of the figures about GDP. I never see them. And I'm glad I don't see them, because that confirms the independence of Stats SA. The data contained in a census is one of the most crucial planning, monitoring, and evaluation tools for government, but not only for government at all levels, national, provincial, and local. But it is also important for other role players as well. It informs the planning, the budgeting, and policy-making work of government at the most fundamental level. Now, as this information has come through, it is going to help us inform how the budget should be structured and how the resources that we have as a nation should be distributed and how they should be allocated. We have long said that one of our priorities in building a capable, ethical, developmental state is to ensure that policy making is evidence-driven. Policy making that is not informed by accurate data can result in inefficiency in the allocation of resources, underestimation with regard to the needs of our citizens, poorly planned programs, and poor financial allocation and management. Now, unless we are able to see the bigger picture, we are unable to focus and to look through the looking glass and see what the future looks like. Now, Census 2022 gives us the information we need to implement the government's program of action in a targeted, evidence-based manner. We are encouraged by the progress in the report represented by the Statistician-General. We note, for example, that the number of people who are older than 20 years, as he was demonstrating there, with no education has significantly decreased. And this is one of the most important measures about the education proficiency of a country. For a country to develop and to charge ahead, you need a cohort, a large cohort of educated, and may I add, well-educated people. Now, this has now shown us that we have made tremendous progress because it shows the number of people who now have grade 12 are more than that we had in 1996. In fact, they have doubled. And this is the real revolution, the real key change in our country, particularly as we remember what apartheid did to our country, to a central and a key life-determining aspect, which is education. When we remember that in 1996, we had so many people who had education at grade 12, we've doubled that number. That is a phenomenal achievement that we all as South Africans should be proud of. It is significant also that a large proportion of our children are now in early childhood development centers. We still have work to do, and you will recall that we moved early childhood development process or education from social development into basic education. Now that in itself was an inspired decision. Now we can see that we are focusing on early childhood development and bringing in more and more children into early childhood development, because that determines the future of the children of South Africa, who are in the end going to be the key people who run our country. Now the presentation that we saw shows that people's housing circumstances have improved, with almost 90% of South Africans now staying in formal housing. Formal housing. And we also saw on the presentation that less and less people in South Africa are living in informal, or if you like it, real old traditional housing. That is diminishing. It's coming down in leaps and bounds. And if you go around the country, you'll see that those who used to live in old roof thatch houses, those houses have been transformed. They're coming down more and more. And the people who live in informal settlement, those numbers are coming down. Now that is a clear demonstration of development, a clear demonstration of showing that we are charging ahead as a nation, that we are modernizing a number of life-determining aspects of the general well-being of our population. Now, despite the present challenges of load shedding, which we are urgently trying to address, we should be encouraged by the almost universal access to electricity supply. The results that have been represented here today underscore the urgency with which we must work towards meeting the aspiration of the National Development Plan and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Just to see that many of our people now have access to electricity, almost 95%. And they have access to water. And we now have a challenge. We now need to increase the number of people who have piped water right into their homes. It is now clear that it is attainable. It is no longer a dream that many of our people had in 1994, where some never thought that they would ever have piped water. We now have reached 82% access to water, an important aspect of the life of our people. So all this shows a great deal of progress. And Census 2022 bears evidence to that, because it has told us where we are making progress, but it has also laid bare the challenges that remain. So as I look at these figures, I don't look at them with a glass-tainted sort of glasses. I look at them to reveal where we need to make progress. And that is the area that we are going to lay more emphasis on. Because what Stats SA has shown us is that we can do it. It can be done. We can give our people a better life. And we now need to complete the task and go out and reach out to those who don't have. Because in the end, as I said in one of the State of the Nation, we want to leave no one behind. And this presentation of the information shows that we can get there, and we will get there, and we are determined to get there, where we will leave no one behind in areas that are most important in the lives of our people. So this Census 2022 is going to be an invaluable tool for me and for those that I serve the nation with in government, because it is going to help us to look at how we can make further progress in meeting the challenges that beset our people. So I salute the people of South Africa who participated in this census. It is through the responses that you, as the people of South Africa, have given via the different platforms of enumeration that we are able to release these results today. We thank the census enumerators for their hard work, as well as the members of Statistics Council. Professor Everhart was explaining to me how they deal with, the process and how they bring in some of the best minds in our country to participate in this whole process. Professors at universities who spend the better part of their lives just looking at data and statistics like this. So we thank them. And they have made sure that the quality of the work that is produced by the Statistician-General has integrity. So I congratulate the Statistician-General SG, Risenga Maluleke, and all Stats SA teams for ensuring that we have a credible census. Let me conclude by calling on government departments, policymakers, researchers, civil society organizations, and indeed international organizations that use information such as this, to use the information abundantly as we collectively strive to improve the lives of our people. We now have the information that we need to ensure that as we build this country, we indeed leave no one behind. And SG, I've longed to get this information. I've been making assumptions that we are at this level of population, but today you have confirmed the actual population numbers that we are. And these are numbers that we can work with to ensure that no one in our country is left behind. So thank you very much, SG, and thank you very much, Professor, and all of you for doing this wonderful work. Thank you.
Your Excellency, Mr. President.
You're most welcome, Melo.
Can we be friends?
We are friends. Thank you, Melo. Now, if you were normal, I would shake your hand.
Yes. May I have a dance with you?
May I ask the SG and the President to please step forward for the SG to hand the report to the President. Please face this way. Thank you.
Mr. President, I have work for you. These are not just the results of the census. This is work.
I'm not lazy.
I have presents for the minister and the deputy ministers. So it's work that they are going to take. In this work, it's the way, Mr. President, we have the media release, we have the actual count, even the post-enumeration survey that talks to the quality of the data that we have produced. So let me hand over to the minister in front of you, Mr. President. And I want to hand over to the deputy ministers in front of you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Deputy Minister Muholo and Deputy Minister Mutau. I must admit the two deputy ministers, Mr. President, keep us a lot of work. Even when we were preparing for the release of these results over the weekend, they demanded data, but I could not give them this data. I gave them the old data, waiting to release this in front of the nation. Thank you.
The minister and the two deputy ministers, if you could please just stand in front for another second for a group photo. The results, please. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are almost at the end of today's proceedings. Yes, Melo, we are almost done. Unless there's another item, Melo, that you'd like to add. No, I didn't think so. Just before we allow the President to take leave of us, I'd just like to deliver a short vote of thanks and express a word of appreciation to the teams from Status A as well as the Presidency, who worked really, really hard to put together this presentation today. It was a true joint effort. I'd also like to pass our sincere thanks to our DG in the Presidency, Ms. Pindile Baleni, for all her leadership and guidance in the process. And I'd also like to thank Melo for the hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much,
May I
Melo.
have a dance with you?
Oh, indeed, yes.
I like dancing.
Yes, I like dancing, Melo.
I will provide the music.
You can provide the music too. Maybe after the function, Melo. Sorry, I couldn't dance with you. I'm still at work, man. Ladies and gentlemen, as I was saying, I'd like to thank the Census A teams, the presidency teams that put all of this presentation together and their hard work. And thank you to the leadership of Census A, the president, the ministers, as well as to the deputy ministers. And lastly, to our colleagues in the media. It's been a long day from the lockup up until now. We thank you for your patience as well as your support and cooperation as always. This brings us to the end of today's proceedings, and I would like to now allow the President to take leave of us, and we will now hand over the program to the leadership of Census A to further engage the media should there be any other questions. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Melo. Look forward to seeing you here in the presidency soon.